Good afternoon and welcome to this year's Rother Parish Conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Pankhurst and I'm the Chairman of the Rother Association of Local Councils, RALC. Due to the pandemic, we are having to hold this meeting remotely via Microsoft Teams. There are technical staff on hand should you experience technical difficulties. Hopefully, we will not need them. The conference is being live streamed and recorded and will be available on the Rother District website, and links enable you to share the recording will be made available after the meeting. Before starting this meeting, there are several things I need to draw your attention to. Please, will everyone other than the panel and presenters ensure their cameras and microphones are switched off for the duration of the meeting. Those of you on our panel, please ensure your camera is on, and if you're comfortable with doing so, unmute your microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Finally, the conference is being live streamed and recorded for sharing later with those who are unable to attend today. I'm joined by Doug Oliver, leader of District Council, who will now give you some details.
Thank you very much, David. I'm truly delighted to be part of this conference today, hosted by Rother District Council to support our colleagues in RALC and our parishes. The main topic is issues around surrounding climate change, and I think there's some interesting presentations that will be coming forward. Before moving forward into the afternoon's agenda, I would really like to acknowledge the preparation for this event, which was undertaken as far back as May of last year by Councillors Projak and Councillor Field, and supported at that time by Alison Springs, taken on by Jane McCulloch and Claire Fletcher with the IT support, and the enthusiasm for this conference from your chairman, David Pankhurst. So I'm really looking forward to the afternoon, and I will go back to David and look forward to the proceedings as they move forward. And thank you. And it's nice to come across so many of you that I haven't actually met before.
Okay. Councillor Oliver. I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Field, who is a Cabinet Portfolio Holder responsible for Environment Management. Councillor Field is also Chair of Rother Climate Change Steering Groups. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, and nice to see everybody. Councillor Oliver, I think, implied I had a lot to do with arranging this. I didn't. The work was entirely down to Sue and the officer team. But I'm going to talk to you about Rother and how we view the climate emergency, because I think climate change is undoubtedly the biggest challenge facing our society. The strategic context for this is wide. First of all, there was the Paris Agreement, which was the first truly global effort to reduce emissions, to hold the increase of global temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Nationally, the government has committed to reach net zero by 2050, and regionally, we have a local energy strategy which consists of the 3 local enterprise partnerships, and Rother District Council is represented on this by South East Local Enterprise Partnership, and what you've just heard is why we call it CELEP. It's much easier to get your mouth around. The aim of CELEP is to become a sustainable energy leader, powering innovative, decarbonised and clean economic growth. We are part of that organisation. That's the context. One of the first acts of the new council was to declare a climate emergency, and our target is to be carbon neutral by 2030. Carbon, I have to say, is verbal shorthand for all those noxious gases which cause global warming, but carbon dioxide makes up 81% of the total. As David said, I'm chair of the Climate Emergency Steering Group, and we met very quickly after we declared our climate emergency, and what we wanted to do was change the world immediately. But we did realise that we needed to think about our approach and what was going to be possible, and agree that whatever was possible was going to be very challenging. First of all, though, a few statistics. In 2016 to 17, This figure fluctuates, but this is the latest we have figures for. Council officers for work travelled 257,937 miles. This is the equivalent of 4,033 times around the district, or 9.7 times around the Earth, or a trip to the moon. These journeys between them used 96.6 metric tonnes of carbon dioxide. The 3-year average for paper usage by the council is a massive 9 million sheets, and the cost of that is £56,000, and the cost is payable by you and me and all the council taxpayers of Rother. So we decided that there really must be a better way. Obviously, it's not possible to do this on our own, but we are in an excellent place to be able to facilitate the changes necessary to help residents to make this happen. And parish councils play the same role as we do in their communities, and that role is enormously important. This can't be done on a top-down basis, and we will only make progress if we are all committed to the project as a whole district working together. Now, our strategy is a working document. It isn't tablets of stone, but there are really two focuses. One is inward looking, what we can do to make the council as green as possible. And the other one is outward looking, how we can use our power and influence to help the wider community to be as green as possible. But we must start by putting our own house in order. This is a very good target in its own right, but also we are a role model, and we must be a role model. We can't encourage residents to do things that we demonstrably aren't doing ourselves. So we want to become a smart digital district, which is easier said than done, given the patchy availability. And I don't say super fast broadband, I say reasonable broadband, because many parishes and bits of the town too don't have decent broadband connections. We want a green economy. We want to improve air quality. We want to encourage the use of sustainable energy. We want to protect biodiversity, and we want to have sustainable buildings, both new ones and existing ones. So in short, we want to be an environmentally friendly council. But here we're very lucky because we've reached the point in the cyclical nature of local council work where we are needing to renew our local plan. And it is this which contains our planning policies, and we can use these to enforce environmentally friendly and sustainable building standards on developers. However, we are constrained by national planning policies and their requirements. But the exciting news is we have formed our own housing company, over which we have complete control and can use this to put our sustainable ideals into practice. And our first big project will be the Blackfriars development in Battle. And this will be a mixture of ownerships for family houses, not large executive properties, but family houses for people and for young children. And these homes will be within walking distance of Battle services. We are actively working on trying to provide access to the down line at Battle Station. Anyone who has tried to get out of the station on that side with a wheelchair, a pushchair, luggage, limited mobility, etc., will know how difficult this is and how discouraging that particular aspect of travel is to travelling by train. It is very difficult. However, because we are the developer of these houses, we can set our own parameters. We've got a long way down the line with this project. There will be a small number of houses built to passive house standards and some earth sheltered homes. The number of each is limited by the topography of the site. Water will be saved by low flow plumbing fittings. There will be attenuation ponds, both for sound building reasons as well as providing biodiversity. There will be a dormouse mitigation area. Connectivity around the site will be provided by pathways defined by planting and natural features and not fencing. All this means that the development will exceed the current building regulations sustainability requirement by 31%, and we can do this because we are in charge. Other features will include air source heat pumps and integral solar panels to avoid fossil fuel usage and to help keep utilities bills low for the residents. Some of you, I'm sure, will already know that Rother District Council is part of the Solar Together Sussex projects, which helps residents to buy cheaper solar panels. But the local plan isn't just about bricks and mortar. We can include policies about, for example, the installation of electric vehicle charging points. And it is my personal view that no building project is complete without at least one of these. We'll work with the County Council and district and borough partners to develop an electric vehicle plan for the county. And let's not forget waste. We all, individuals and councils and businesses, bear a huge responsibility for the amount of waste the council has to deal with. And we can't salve our consciences by feeling good about recycling. This is an emission-producing business where recyclates are driven around the country in big lorries to be processed industrially into something else, which goes back to a new point of sale in another big dirty lorry. Far better to reuse your rubbish at home, or indeed not to use it in the first place. Now, all of these measures which apply to us, of course, apply to our supply chain as well. We have enormous power as a council when it comes to procurement and awarding contracts, and we must do our best to ensure that people and businesses to whom we award contracts have the same commitment to sustainability as we do. On the plus side, 82% of Rother is in the AONB, and we have 2 Ramsar sites. Our total woodland is around 10,211 hectares, so we have a good start when it comes to biodiversity. The value of trees in the landscape really can't be overestimated. They provide shelter and shade and screening. They make an important contribution visually to the rural and to the urban landscape. They play an important role in the ecological cycle and provide habitats for many species of mammals, birds and insects. They also help to reduce the negative effects of a changing climate. Trees, for example, remove carbon dioxide. And of course, tree roots manage the risk of flooding. And they are a renewable source of energy. We have a lot of them, which is a good place to start. Our strategy is in place, and it's, as I said, an active document. We've given ourselves a very challenging target of 2030 to achieve carbon neutrality. But when we have succeeded, the air will be cleaner as we reduce the need to travel in unsustainable ways. The natural and built environments will be enhanced and protected for future generations. The council will be carbon neutral. More energy will become from renewable low carbon sources. Fewer people will live in fuel poverty. Waste will be reduced. We will use less water. The district will be resilient to freak weather events, and everyone will play their part willingly in reducing their impact on the environment. And I'll leave you with the question, isn't that worth working for? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Catherine. Did you want to introduce a new member of staff for?
Yes, I will.
Rother?
We very quickly realised that we as councillors couldn't do this work by ourselves, and that no officer on the council, although extremely willing and quick to learn and able, was in the right position to take on this work for us. So we have employed Christina Sodomkova, who comes very highly recommended with amazing credentials to lead this work on behalf of the council. And I think soon you will see Christina on your screens. And we are delighted to have her on board.
Good afternoon, Christina. You're muted. There you go. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, David, and thank you, Councillor Field, for the introduction.
Okay. I understand you come from a unitary local authority in the southwest prior to being with us, and you also work for the Environment Agency on flood risk. Is that correct?
Yes, I do have quite a mixed background. I have come from Devon, where I worked for Plymouth City Council. Previous to that, I worked for the Environment Agency in a range of functions, flood risk management, water resources, and water quality. And I think this breadth of experience is quite important because environmental issues are cross-cutting, multidisciplinary. So I think it's quite a useful background to have taking on a role such as this. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Christina. I'm sure you bring a wealth of experience with you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you to Councillor Field and Christina. Before I introduce you to our first presenters, please may I ask that any questions you wish to raise are done so via the chat facility. You can access the chat by clicking on the speech bubble icon and typing your question in full. You may want to put the speaker's name if you would like them to respond to it. And then I'll try to ensure that they are asked during the Q&A sessions, obviously time permitting. Please do not use the raise hand facility, as we're not able to respond to this today. And if we're unable to answer the questions today, either for running out of time or they are much deeper questions, you can be assured we will endeavour to provide responses later. And in that case, you may, if you wish, want to give your details, which if you indicate whether or not you want me to read them out, I will do. Okay. I'd like now to introduce our first presenters, Keith Thatchler from the High Weald Landscape Trust and Fergus Garrett, who's Chief Executive of the Great Dixter Charitable Trust. They're going to give a presentation on wildflower verges versus verge grass cutting. Just a brief background for those that don't know a great deal about either of them. Keith is OBE and he's worked in agriculture for nearly half a century. He attended Plumpton Agricultural College before moving into commercial farming. Most of his working life has been with the Wills family estate in East Sussex, and he has steered the 2,000-acre beech estate through many changes, the most profound being the restructuring from a commercial mixed farming and forestry enterprise to a conservation-based organic system structured around countryside stewardship. This work was recognised when he was awarded National Winner of England's Future of Farming Awards in 2007, and he was further awarded an OBE for service to the protection of endangered landscapes in 2008. Keith's interested in our human place within the environment. He feels too often that the environment is seen as something external to our existence, simply to be observed. We live within it. We need to reconnect with nature. This is Keith's greatest passion. Keith is a trustee of the People Need Nature, a co-founder and trustee of the High Weald Landscape Trust, a partner in Weald Meadows Partnership, former trustee of the Grassland Trust, former member of the steering committee Coronation Meadows Project, Plant Life, and a former member of the project board for the Nature of God's Acre. Fergus, he studied agriculture at Y College, University of London. He was appointed in 1993 as head gardener of Great Dixter and is now the CEO of the Great Dixter Charitable Trust. Fergus has received many honours, including in 2008, the Royal Horticultural Society Associate of Honour, the VTech Memorial Medal for Outstanding Contribution to the Practice of Horticulture in 2015, and in 2019, the Victoria Medal of Honour, the highest accolade given to British gardeners by the Royal Horticultural Society. Fergus has received many national and international awards for his work in education, horticulture and biodiversity. He sits on various committees and editorial boards and is the president of the Northiam Horticultural Society and a patron of the Beth Chateau Education Charity. His interests lie in plant association and communities in the wild, biodiversities, meadow gardening, layered planting, as well as peasant and artisan life and the training of the young. He lives in Hastings with his wife and two daughters. Enough from me. I'll hand you over to two very, very interesting speakers.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and really such sort of uplifting talk from Councillor Field as well. We're very sort of pleased to be in this environment. So we're going to talk a bit about roadside verges and meadows and how it all sort of links up. I've got Keith Thatchler, as you've heard. He's sort of very well qualified. I call him the king of meadows. And we've known each other for a long time, and our passion has been biodiversity and how we can make a difference in not only in our field but in the environment around us. So we've got a little sort of presentation which I will start for you. Just a few facts to start off with.
Is that visible to everybody?
Yes, I think it is. It's got a red band around it. So the recent government report on loss of biodiversity in the UK paints a grim picture. I think everybody's aware of that. But just a few facts on it. Things like woodland bird index down 29% since 1970. The pollinator index is down 30% since 1980. More than 2/5 of UK species are showing a significant decline.
Yeah, this may sound sort of over dramatic, but anyone of my age will remember probably going on holiday with their folks, and the curse of the drive was the squashed insects on the windscreen. Where did they go? It suddenly stopped, and they are the food of so many of our birds. And this is, I think, indicates why those previous figures are so terrifying. And just the recent another sort of terrifying statistic has been that information is that UK has failed to reach 17 out of 20 UN biodiversity targets agreed on 2 years or 10 years ago. So that's an extraordinary amount. So, but interesting times, isn't it? And the shockwaves of COVID have reminded us of the precious relationship between us and nature. But we know that thousands of acres are being lost to development, but we need places to live. And thousands of acres are lost to intensive agriculture, but we need to produce food. And it's important for us to realise that there's 240,000 hectares of roadside verge in the United Kingdom. And this is an area bigger than the Lake District National Park. Just an incredible area, 500,000 acres, and it all sits outside of intensive agriculture. So there's zero effect on food production. So this is a huge asset.
And verges are a valuable habitat to link not only wild spaces, but also urban spaces. And this is important.
Yeah, these verges, that for many people, especially with this COVID going on, you're living in a flat. So maybe this verge is the only exposure and the chance you get to connect with nature. So they're super, super important and thread throughout the entire country. They're available to everyone.
And we all know that we're a nation of gardeners, and the gardening culture sits very deep on this island. There are over 520,000 hectares of garden in the UK. And I just wanted to just talk about the value of a garden, because our biodiversity audit has shown that we as a garden, this is Great Dixter, we're richer than the wild land around us. So we mustn't underestimate the importance of gardens and the importance of verges and linking all our habitats together. The countryside can flow into towns and cities, verges being the conduits to the other, or the other way around. And all of it in the same way that there's a web of life, that there's a web between habitats as well. So this connectivity is very, very important. So at Dixter, for instance, we recorded over 2,300 species in 1 year. There's over 100 species of lichen, over 120 species of bee, over 400 species of moth. There are many species of butterfly, including 32 species that are of principal importance in the UK. There are over 200 species of spider. And this is all from the scientists coming in 1 year, so just from a handful of visits. And our lead ecologist said that this is one of the richest sites he's surveyed in the 30 years of surveying, and he's changed the way that he thinks about gardens. He now calls Great Dixter Garden Nature Reserve, which should be designated a local nature reserve and a local wildlife site with lots of rare species in it. And then, that's enough about a garden. But if you look at this aerial photograph of Great Dixter, and you look at the conurbation in the centre, the buildings in the centre and the wild land that sits around it, and then you look at the two images below that of a town and a city, it's scaling up. It's the same sort of structure. You've got the developed places in the centre with the wild land or the natural land that sits around it. So there's no reason why what happens at Dixter can't be scaled up to a town and a city.
Or scaled down to a domestic garden.
Absolutely, and so the techniques and mosaic systems used at Great Dixter can be replicated in any garden, village, town or city. And it really needs politicians, ecologists, town planners, you know, that's so important, the planning side of things, councils, builders, landscapers, architects, landscape architects, volunteer groups, gardeners and private individuals to have the will to work together. But as well as that, we need the science behind us to be most effective, because for us at Great Dixter, our sort of efforts in increasing biodiversity were rather ad hoc until we got a biodiversity audit done, which looked at what we've got here, and then it looked at how we could improve that or target certain species so that we could be most effective in our methods.
Yeah, and it was very interesting to hear Catherine talk earlier, and certainly at the planning stage, which Fergus has just mentioned, the cost of putting a swift box as a brick, or a bee nest as a brick, or a bat nest as a brick at the point of building is pennies. So if only we could have that in our planning structure, and hopefully that's one of the things, I can't preempt what Catherine's doing, but it's so vital to have that at the beginning, at the planning stage. You shouldn't be able to build a house these days without putting those things in.
And if we're looking at this photograph of Great Dixter, and so it's detached from what we're talking about in towns and cities, but is it detached from that? Because here what we've got is a building, or it could be a series of buildings. Here what we've got is a garden, an ornamental aesthetic garden. Here what we've got is a roadway or a pathway. It could be an A road or a B road, or it could be a garden path like this. Here we've got a mown area, which is also important in terms of creating a mosaic structure and a habitat. That mown area can be a lawn, but also it can be something that allows you to see a road sign and so on, that we need these sort of verges to be safe as well. And here we've got a long grass area, and we've got woodland attached as well. This is no different from a situation that we could have in these sort of areas. And I think an important part of this is a section of meadow at Dixter, is to manage expectations of the public. It was very interesting for us at Dixter, because whenever we talked to anybody about creating a wildlife garden, they always pointed to a picture like this of a meadow full of common spotted orchids. Whereas this study showed us that the borders themselves are richer in many ways in terms of life as these meadow areas. The studies also showed us that those scrappy little fields that we've got around us that get trampled during a plant fair or are mown on an ad hoc basis that may have nettles and hogweed and areas of bramble on it and so on, and got woodland edge, those areas are rich, if not richer than areas like this. But, you know, you don't want to just work on a heat map of biodiversity. All of these areas work together in a mosaic system, but it's important to manage those expectations.
Yeah, managing people's expectations on the work that we did in Battle was absolutely key. And in fact, you know, very often you learn as much by getting things wrong as getting them right. And we certainly got it wrong in Battle. We just went ahead with things. We didn't carry people along with us. We didn't have good interpretation, and that was a hiccup. It was the wrong thing to do. What you've got to do is educate people, and you have got to understand that you've got to move away from tidy. This idea that if it's 2 inches high and green, that's good management, and it just isn't. Just by stopping mowing, never mind that attempt at getting the super floristic content that Fergus just shown, just stop mowing and you will increase the insect life by up to 4 times. You're then allowing things to seed, you've got seed for birds. It's crucial. It's a win-win. You're reducing your carbon footprint because the mower's not there, and you're saving costs. I mean, it's amazing, really, we even have to discuss it. It's so obvious and it's so vital.
And when you consider that web of life and you increase insect life by or insect populations by fourfold, you can just see how that effect will build up to the higher predators that go along that food chain. So it's all very well thinking about green-winged orchids and those sort of things, but these areas that are just sort of mediocre meadows should be embraced by us as well, because these are photographs of the plant Fairfield where actually the diversity is extraordinarily rich. In fact, in all our studies that we did, after the ornamental garden itself, these came second for quite a lot of the species that we've got. And that sort of effect, when you look at these pictures and what is visible in these pictures, from buildings to trees to woodland edge to mown areas to lawn areas, you can see that all of this is within our reach with sympathetic management. Mm-hmm. And there is, of course, the machinery out there now. If we were having this talk 15 years ago, you would be scratching around for finding the right tools to actually make it manageable to cut these meadow areas. But everything from handling mini bales to being able to cut steep verges remotely, that is all possible. And these photographs are actually photographs of machinery that is relatively old, and there have been more recent developments on all this.
Yeah, Lincolnshire as a council has taken a lead. They are harvesting their long grass. It is going into a biodigester and they're producing electricity with it. So that's completely closed the circle. It has to be the right way forward.
And there are many things we can do on all fronts. So from farming sympathetically as much as we can, to perhaps the extreme case of those sort of tower blocks that you've seen designed by Laura Gatti, to then the rewilding projects that we have certainly at NET, to making sure that we spray less in our gardens and garden for biodiversity, to managing our roadside and our verges. All of that will add to something quite significant. 280,000 hectares of roadside verge, 520,000 hectares of garden. Okay, and so that these roadside verges can be conduits of biodiversity, actually making their way into towns and cities and villages, and vice versa, it working the other way as well.
Yeah, it's so important that we realise this connection, because isolated patches of any kind of wilderness will eventually collapse, because you lose your gene pool. So this connectivity, Fergus has mentioned the science, and it's very important that we have this connectivity, not just for the joy of the animals being able to hop from one place to another, but it actually increases and strengthens the gene pool in everything.
And really, this is all within our reach. Now, if we said that we're going to rewild everywhere, all the agricultural land around us, and so that isn't possible to do. We need to produce food, but like Keith said, the roadside verge areas is outside of our food production areas, so there's no sensitivity there, and the machinery is there. Then we can write our budgets accordingly. It could create a big cost saving. It can create jobs as well, and many of these things that we have covered do not represent a cost. In fact, they represent a saving. And like Keith said, that connectivity is vital for our wildlife to move around. And we've got enough pressure on the land in this island now. And so there is a resource sitting there, perhaps being mismanaged. In many cases being mismanaged, that could really add up to something quite significant.
Yeah. And it's where we are. It's the human presence. This is not meadows for meadows' sake. This is our environment. This is where we go, and you manage the environment of any species for the success of that species. We seem to be doing it across the globe for every species, with the exception of our own species. So we need to think as a species, not as individuals, and that way perhaps we can really make a difference.
And this is the picture that we always fall back on at Dixter in terms of our wildlife gardening. But I want to say at this point that the important point for us was having an ecologist on board, or a series of ecologists on board, to look at everything that we did at Dixter, from our meadow management to our woodland management to the ecotones of those sort of scrubby areas that join woodland to grassland, to looking at the porous buildings and the barns and the great house and so on, to looking at the ornamental borders, also looking at mown grass and all of those areas. And those people, those scientists that analyze those areas and coming up with the facts, and the facts that arose from that were totally surprising to us. So I think this knowledge is really, really quite important for us to be intelligent in the way that we go forward in this, because, and creating this diversity of habitats, not only on our verges, but on the sort of woodland areas, but also in our towns and cities, is absolutely possible for us to do.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, both. I thought we'd lost you there for a moment.
Yeah.
Extremely interesting. And there are a few questions coming through, which I will ask in the Q&A session. Right, now can I introduce Janet Ackroyd, East Sussex County Council's Climate Emergency Officer, to give a presentation on the East Sussex Environment Board and its strategy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me along this afternoon. And yeah, very interesting presentation from both of the previous speakers. In fact, some of the material I'm going to cover was probably already covered to some extent by Councillor Field. So we'll be pleased to say there's some commonality there. I'm just going to launch my presentation and share my screen. So can I just check everybody can see that?
I can see it. I suspect everybody else can as well.
Okay. So what I've been asked to come along this afternoon, representing my boss Andy Arnold. He's the environment team leader. He's on holiday at the moment, lucky him. My role at East Sussex County Council is a bit like Christina's. It's a newly created role. I started in the job at the beginning of July. And my role is Climate Emergency Officer, with a particular focus on looking at how we can reduce carbon emissions from our own activities, so our council buildings, and our own fleet and business travel, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon, just run through the key points. I'm going to talk through why does climate change matter. We've already heard some of that from the previous speakers, but how it matters and how it's going to affect us in East Sussex County Council. What is the scale of change that we need to do to address the impacts and avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change. Look at what's already been done already and how local authorities can help, how we can play our part. Again, I can see some of that's already been flagged up by Councillor Field in her presentation, and talk about what next. A few thoughts on how we can capitalise on events like this and make more progress together. So, thinking about why climate change is important, I think everybody's really aware of why climate change is a pressing matter, but we're in the middle of a pandemic at the moment, and obviously that's an acute emergency. It's grabbing a lot of attention, but climate change is not going away. That emergency still exists. It still needs to be addressed, and as Councillor Field mentioned already, we've already seen 1 degree of warming already from the planet base compared to pre-industrial levels, and that's already resulting today in damaging impacts on personal lives, on infrastructure and on systems. So global sea level rises have risen by 20 centimetres since the start of the 20th century, and crop yields have reduced by about 5% since the 1960s. And in fact, if we carry on with the business as usual, what this slide shows is we would reach a global temperature rise of between 4 and 5 degrees by 2100. But even in the best case scenario of what's been committed at the Paris Climate Agreement and limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, we're still going to see an impact. We are already seeing an impact. And unfortunately, those extreme temperature rises are going to happen in the most disadvantaged parts of the world. And in fact, to communities who were responsible historically for a much smaller proportion of global emissions, and are also least able to deal with the effects. But even here in East Sussex, we're going to see an impact, and we are seeing an impact. And predicted impacts in our area include wetter, warmer winters, so more frequent and more intense flooding, and we have already seen evidence of that. And we'll have hotter, drier summers, so more extreme heat and drought. And this will lead to an increase in heat-related deaths, unfortunately, amongst the elderly and the vulnerable. It results in damage to our infrastructure, our roads and our buildings. And we'll see an increased costs on food as supply chains are disrupted and services are impacted on. We live in a beautiful coastal area. Those rising sea levels will increase coastal erosion and impact on coastal habitats. And in fact, it's already been made clear by previous speakers, none of us will be able to shield ourselves from the effect of climate change. But whilst it seems a bit overwhelming and a little bit doom and gloom, there are positive things that can be done and positive benefits. And again, there'll be a little bit of commonality in my next slide on some of the points that Councillor Field mentioned. The benefits include greater prosperity. So the costs of taking action to reduce our carbon emissions are estimated by the Committee on Climate Change to be between 1 and 2% of UK gross domestic product. But if we don't do anything, the cost of inaction will be bigger than that, around 5% as estimated in the Stern report. The low carbon and environmental sector has already contributed £30 billion to the UK economy in 2015. It's a growing area, it's employing almost 500,000 people, largely in high value jobs, and it's grown significantly between 2010 and 2015 by over 20%. And here in East Sussex, we have again a growing low carbon and environmental sector with 500 businesses employing over 9,000 staff and accounting for £1.2 billion worth of sales. If businesses take action to reduce their energy efficiency, increase their energy efficiency and reduce their carbon emissions, they could achieve a 20% by 2030, and that would make £6 billion worth of cost savings and cut emissions in this country by 22 million tonnes of CO2. There's also a benefit to be seen on improved health, and again this was touched on in a previous presentation. So a lot of the measures to reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gases also reduce air pollution, things like switching from petrol and diesel cars to electric vehicles, for example. Winter deaths, a third of the 30-odd thousand national excess winter deaths are due to people living in cold, poorly insulated homes. By improving levels of insulation, we can have an immediate and long-lasting impact on health of people living in those kinds of buildings. Looking at diet, switching to a diet where you eat less intensively reared red meat would cut emissions by up to 17%, and also have health benefits in terms of diabetes, stroke and certain types of cancer. Exercise. Investing in walking and cycling has got a cost-benefit ratio of between 2 to 1 and 10 to 1, because those that exercise are more productive, and also there's a direct cost saving on the NHS by improved health. And last but by no means least, greater energy security. If we improve our energy efficiency and generate more of our electricity cleanly from renewables, that reduces our reliance on imported oil and gas, which are largely from politically volatile regions. So, what is the size of the task? This next slide, I'll just run through there. We talked about having already reached 1% of 1 degree of warming, we want to limit to no more than 1.5 degrees. To do that, we have to limit the amount of greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere going forward. And that gives us a global budget for the whole planet, for individual nations, and then down at local areas. So in East Sussex, if we want to stick within a budget that will enable us to make our contribution towards staying within 1.5%, then the remaining carbon budget we've got left is 14 million tonnes of carbon. Now, if we don't do anything and we carried on with business as usual, we'd use up that carbon budget within the next 7 years. And what this diagram shows is the scale and pace of change that's needed if we want to decarbonise by 2050. That would require us to reduce our carbon emissions by 13% per year. To set that in context, the carbon emissions in East Sussex fell by 27%, so about a third between 2005 and 2016, which is at a rate of 2.5% per year. So clearly there's a lot to be done, and the scale and pace of change has really got to be ramped up. But to help do that, one of the first things that we've done, another local authorities have done, is setting a clear evidence-based, science-based target to show you what your budget is and what you've got to do to stay within that over the next few years. The good news is there is already a great deal of good stuff already being done, and I'll just run through some of that. We have legislation and policy in place. So at a national level and a local level, there have been commitments to decarbonise by 2050 or 2030. So that's providing a strong basis for reducing carbon emissions in the UK. There are also fiscal measures that are in place. So taxes on carbon emissions, for example, the emissions trading scheme, and also subsidies for investment in renewables and switching to electric vehicles, for example. There are a number of funding streams that are open to the public sector to help cut emissions, and there are voluntary sector-based schemes to help reduce carbon emissions, so agreement between government and certain sectors to provide economic incentives to help deliver net zero emissions. For example, the UK offshore sector deal was established quite recently to support the wind sector to produce a third of UK electricity by 2030. And there are regional energy hubs such as the South East Energy Hub who can provide expertise and additional capacity to help develop projects. Some local examples of activity are things like Community Energy South that are based in Lewes. They bring together a number of community-based organisations across the south to help develop community energy schemes, particularly solar PV. There's also the Low Case programme, which provides free energy audits and grants to businesses to help them to improve energy efficiency and cut their emissions. And Councillor Field mentioned earlier the Sussex Solar Together scheme for most of the local authorities in Sussex together to promote and support residents to buy lower, more competitively priced solar PV. And much of this good work is documented in existing documents such as the Committee on Climate Change report on net zero and in the East Sussex Environment Strategy that was released earlier this year. So what can local authorities do to help change go along? Well, there's three main influences, and again, I say a lot of commonality here with what Councillor Field said at the start of the event. In the first place, we can show leadership, and I think we need to demonstrate that we're getting our own house in order. I think that's one of the points that Councillor Field made. So looking at our own operations where we've got direct control over our carbon emissions. There's enabling things we can do to help others to make the right choices, and particularly in areas where local authorities have got a role in policy and service provision. And we can also provide inspiration to help others to reduce their emissions. So choices that residents and businesses and communities have and visitors to the area. Just going through those in a little bit more detail. How on leadership, local authorities can set a science-based target and look at how they can achieve carbon neutrality, and then that will require putting resources in place to achieve the target. So I've been put into my role, and Christina is there at Rother doing a similar role. And then aligning policies to address the emergency and setting a clear plan of action to help reduce carbon emissions. At East Sussex County Council, we've had an energy management team in place for a number of years. I used to work within that team, and we've developed a carbon reduction plan. And we've got a reasonable idea of where we're going to start and where we're going to target, but there's still some areas where we don't yet know how we're going to get to net zero. So, for example, staff commuting and procurement are areas that we're only just beginning to look at. And there's still a great deal of uncertainty in some other areas, notably how to decarbonise heat, not so much in new build, but in our existing buildings. And we have a lot of existing buildings in the area. So we've got to look at how we best deal with that, and also looking at where we absolutely can't reduce our emissions to zero, how we can best offset our carbon emissions that we can't reduce. In terms of enabling actions, which, as we mentioned earlier, things like policy, and every tier of government has got the ability to enable the transition to zero carbon, because we've got different statutory roles and responsibilities and political drivers. So working collectively can really help to develop the same sort of messaging, developing common pipelines of projects and signposting to each other's programmes, and we can then have a greater impact than working on our own, perhaps. And there are areas where different tiers of the local authorities have been working together for a long time, things like waste, and we've got collective approaches. And then we might be able to do more on items to deal with climate change and reducing carbon for our communities. And then in terms of inspiring, that part of the jigsaw is where we've got the least direct effect. We can take actions on our own estate, our own assets, but in terms of inspiring others to do their part and influence and provide a role model, then we've got a fair number of examples of where we can get involved with that. So I think the last presentation linked in with this, but we've got a truly unique natural environment, which is part of the solution. We're talking about biodiversity on grass verges, for example, but there's been already a change in our native species that are being affected and changed as temperatures rise. So we need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at how we can nurture that and help to mitigate climate change through our natural resources. And in fact, East Sussex County Council hosts the very strong Sussex Local Nature Partnership that looks at those items. They might very well be interested in the presentation on the grass verges. East Sussex County Council, as I mentioned earlier, has got a growing sector focused on low carbon goods and services, and we need to nurture that, not only to help reduce climate change, but as part of the COVID recovery plan, because it creates jobs that are truly sustainable. We've also got an engaged generation of school children and students who are looking for ways to play their part. And we're working with the Youth Cabinet of East Sussex to help school children to carry out energy audits of their schools, and we can then see how we can assist them to implementing energy efficiency improvements. We can also make the case that addressing climate change delivers other benefits, and again, Councillor Field touched on this and I mentioned this earlier. There's a lot of commonality with things like reducing carbon emissions and improving air quality. And reducing the impact and serious levels of premature death from people who are affected by poor air quality across the UK. So that's another area where we can inspire and provide leadership. And the Sussex Air Quality Partnership, which East Sussex County Council also has, provides a strong vehicle for partnership working in that particular area. So I'm just going to round up the presentation really on what next. We can achieve much more by working together. Addressing climate change can't be solved by one individual, one officer, one council, one business. it relies on all local authorities, communities and residents working together. In terms of working together with local authorities, it would be really helpful if we could develop some common messages. So we're saying, putting across common messages and themes on how we can support our residents to make the right choices, our businesses to make the right choices, and they're feeling enabled and inspired to do so. And one of those examples is the Solent Sussex Together, where we've already worked in partnership to do that, promoting in different ways and means via our existing communication channels to help encourage take-up of solar PV from homeowners in the areas. Now, in terms of going forward, in terms of a couple of priorities, it would be really great to see the development of a common roadmap to net zero, and also looking at developing pipelines of carbon projects. We've had the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund released this year, £1 billion worth of funding. It's got to be spent very quickly. So having shovel-ready projects ready to bid for when those kind of funding opportunities become available would be, it's going to be increasingly important. So I think that rounds up my presentation. I'd just like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. And I will just take my presentation down. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jeanette. My apologies for not fully introducing you at the start there.
No problem.
I think for the benefit of everybody, people should know that you also hold a physics degree in civil engineering, masters and various professional qualifications, including the Energy Institute Advanced Energy Manager, IEMA Registered Auditor, and ISO 14001 Lead Auditor. So I think you probably know what you're talking about.
I don't know everything. I mean, wow, climate change is an area where, again, we all need to come together. We haven't all got the solutions and the ideas. And my knowledge is very much based on buildings and projects, energy efficiency and renewables. I've also worked across the environment sector. I've worked in waste and water efficiency, but I do not know it all. Not one single, as I say, not one single individual, officer, council or business has the solution. And working together to rise to the challenge is going to be so important going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, just to remind you, if you have any questions, can you post on the chat facility for answering in due course? I see, in fact, there's quite a number have been coming in. And finally, I'd like to introduce Simon Pryor, who is Viridor's Head of Local Authority Development and will be presenting on waste hierarchy. Simon.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to meet you all virtually, and with any luck in the future we will get to meet you in person. We've met some of you already at Crayford, so I'm just preparing to share the screen, which I think you should be able to see now. So let's just pop that larger for you. It's based on my eyesight. There we go. So what do we do at Viridor? I thought that we would share with you some of how we dovetail into the waste hierarchy. Waste hierarchy has been talked about and can be talked about ad infinitum about how we should reduce, reuse and recycle. There's a little bit more to it, I guess, these days. We can take a deep dive into each area. But what I thought I'd do is just outline some of the areas that Viridor are active within the waste hierarchy. Mindful all of the time that we look at waste as a valuable resource in all of its areas. So just looking at our business, there's three key areas of the business that I work in. One is the energy business, and that is what I would describe as low carbon, not quite renewable, but low carbon energy based on taking residual waste that cannot be recycled any further, burning it in a very controlled and regulated manner to generate electricity, and then taking the offtake of that burning, the ash and the metals that are liberated from that, and then reusing those materials in terms of building products, road building, and recycling of metals. Similar to the New Haven ERF, Viridor operate 12 of these sites around the UK, all across Wales, England, up north and into Scotland. So quite a diverse number of sites. Plastics are becoming one of the key areas of Viridor's growth. We are investing huge amounts of money to ensure that all of the plastics that are captured at the roadside and in other areas can go through a reprocessing mechanism so that they can be turned into new materials for the future and be reused. And the area of the business that I concentrate in is recycling. And in terms of recycling, it's all about quality of material. So we work with local authorities, we work with other waste industry competitors and take their materials, and we sort those materials through primary sorting, secondary sorting, and then in certain areas we reprocess the materials ourselves to create end of waste. So feeding that into waste hierarchy, it's all about grabbing the material when you can, through well-designed products that are designed for recyclability, taking those products and passing them through our processes. In terms of the recycling part of our organisation, we have 2 plants that reprocess glass. So they take broken glass or glass bottles, sort those into the various colours, and then we then send those to the glass melters to create new bottles. So we take the material from curbside, either through recycling at curbside or from bins with pubs, and move all of that material through the supply chain to get that resource back into industry. Metals, we don't have a huge amount of work in metals other than the initial sortation at the MRFs. Waste electrical equipment, again, is a huge area of business across the UK, not just for Viridor, but for others. And that's really one of the key recycling areas within the UK and the world moving forward, because there are so many rare and precious metals, rare elements within waste within electronic equipment that becomes waste electronic and electrical equipment. And it's the recovery of those resources that's key. Paper and card. The UK has been very, very good at recycling paper and card over many, many years. Just a quick fact for you, a lot of paper is exported, a lot of cardboard is exported from the UK to be reprocessed. And you may ask the question why. Circa 8 million tonnes of paper and cardboard is recovered and collected across the UK every year. But the UK only has the reprocessing capacity to reprocess 3 million tonnes. So a huge amount of fibre is imported in the UK every year, and a huge amount of it has to be exported in order to get it reprocessed. And there is a carbon saving in doing that, regardless of where it goes around the world. But we're not going to get into that in too much depth today. Organics, we have our finger in the soil in terms of organic recycling, both in terms of food and garden waste. And those organics lead to composting as well. We touched on the plastics, and a huge area of my focus is MRFs, so our material recycling facilities around the country, where we where we sort in the region of 800,000 tonnes of material every year. Viridor Crayford MRF is the materials recycling facility where your curbside collected recycling goes to be sorted. It's one of Europe's largest sites. It uses a lot of well tried and tested technologies, but advanced technologies to ensure that we maximise the capture and we liberate the highest percentage of material that we can from the recycling that we receive. And what we do, we sort the material and we produce high quality single stream materials, which can then go for onward reprocessing. Our local authority partners sell curbside collected recycling to assist recycling targets, and the businesses improve. So we're looking to improve your environmental performance across county and within all of the districts within East Sussex. So the types of materials that we take, we describe as fully commingled with glass. So that is your plastic, your household plastics, your household paper and cardboard, your household metals, so beverage cans, steel cans, glass, and of course the plastics in there as well. That can be with the glass or without the glass. Our plant can cope with both. And we also take a small amount of just plastics, cans and glass as a small combination without fibre. What we sort these materials into, I describe it as OCC, so that's ordinary corrugated cardboard. So that is your brown cardboard, of which there is a huge amount and an increasing amount being captured at the moment by yourselves and your residents at the curbside through online shopping. So COVID-19 has had a massive effect on the mix and the composition of your recycling that you put in your bins. Newspapers and magazines, newspapers and pamphlets, so high quality paper, mixed paper, which is ordinary junk mail, stroke books, that type of paper, slightly lower quality, so that's dealt with separately. Aluminium cans, so that's from soft drink cans, beer cans, etc. Steel cans, could be baked bean cans, all sorts of canned foods. Glass, so we will capture the glass and we will either deal with that in terms of its larger fragment within our glass plants. So we'll ship it up to the glass plants and they'll sort it by colour. Where the glass is a lot smaller and a lot smaller fragments, we'll refine that glass and we'll basically turn it back to sand from where it came. It can't be colour sorted, it can't be recycled, but we will make an end of waste aggregate for the building and construction industry out of that. Two technical polymer terms here, HDPE natural and PET clear. Those two polymers, those two plastics, are essentially your milk bottles and your water bottles, that type of plastic. And the remaining plastics, so coloured plastics and food trays, as an example, we then sort those and they go to a separate secondary processing site in Rochester in Kent. At that site, again, they separate all of the polymers, all the remaining 8 polymers, and they can be baled and then sent to reprocessors to create basically a recovered material, which will then go to replace virgin polymer in bottles and trays moving forward. And then residual waste, so that can't be recycled, is also really, really important to capture that material properly, to keep it dry, and to then be able to use that as a fuel to generate electricity. Just to give you a quick overview of the site, it's a 10-acre site, large number of buildings. Basically, on average, the plant takes about 1,000 tonnes a day, Monday to Friday. So there's 1,000 tonnes of material coming into our site and 1,000 tonnes leaving the site, because if we don't if we don't move the material off site that we've had on, we will end up with huge amounts of output and we won't be able to take the input. Currently, with the increase of recyclate that we receive from yourselves due to COVID-19, people working from home, people not working in offices, people not throwing plastics and cans out of their car windows on the curbside, on the verges, the amount of recycling that we receive is about 20% up from normal. So we're not receiving circa 1,000 tonnes a day. We're currently receiving about 1,200 tonnes a day. And the plant has been able to flex up to be able to cope with that material. So we're processing ordinarily, pre-COVID, 300,000 tonnes per year at the site. The benefit there is that it does give scale, gives the benefits of scale. So it reduces the cost per tonne of operating the site. Site is licensed for 350,000 tonnes. So ordinarily 300,000 tonnes is quite a good sweet spot for us. At the moment, we are up to, in this financial year, up to about the 335 to 340,000 tonnes owing to COVID. So it has been quite a challenge. But the site is 24 hours, 7 days a week, on 2 shifts, 363 days a year. So we take a couple of days off, Christmas and Easter. And the only way we manage to keep this plant working 7 days a week is by having daily, weekly and monthly maintenance. Literally maintenance is ongoing on that plant whilst it works where we can, during shift breaks when people are not operating the machinery. People go into the plant and we're constantly oiling, greasing, detangling, taking things off conveyor belts that have got stuck. So things are happening to the plant all the time, day in, day out, to make sure it works. The site takes materials, so recyclable, curbside collected materials from 29 local authorities. So we have a contract with East Sussex Direct, which includes yourselves, as well as, for example, Kent County Council, where we have, again, another 7 districts and boroughs coming in. Materials come from essentially Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole, all of East Sussex, half of Surrey, 3/4 of Kent, half of Essex and some London boroughs, and then a little bit from what I'd say up north towards Oxford. So it's a busy site, and the scalability makes it a competitive place and an efficient place to sort your materials. We have quality challenges, and this is not the nicest slide in the world. But these are the obstacles that we come across that people think should be part of your curbside recyclable material. So things like animal bedding, straw, garden waste, lots of food waste. It's amazing the amount of unopened packaging that we receive that's still full of food. It's amazing how much food waste, rather than going into a food waste caddy, people put in their recycling bins. Huge amounts of nappies and sanitary material that comes into people's recycling bins. I'm not quite sure how the general public think that we can recycle a used nappy. I'd like to get them all up to the plant to show them what they're actually doing to us. But they tend to mix this with lots of nice recyclable materials, and the problem there is that we then lose the recyclable materials. If there's enough contamination in a truckload of material that we've hauled from East Sussex, where we really do maximise the tonnage that we get per load. So between 21, 22 tonnes per load. If enough contamination and non-recyclable material sits within that 20, 22 tonnes, you can't process any of it. And that's a huge cost, not only in loss of resources, but in actual financial cost to county. And my guess is that passes back down to the taxpayer. But on the good side, on the plus side, where we're pulling the plastics, where we're sorting the plastics, Viridor's very, very active within the UK, European and global circular economy. We take the materials from yourselves, so at 12 o'clock on the circular diagram there, we're taking the materials being used by the households at the curbside, taking them to our MRF, to our materials recovery facility, sorting them there, and then we're then taking them to one plant at the moment, and will become two plants in January, February 2021. So we take those materials and we'll sort them, and then we'll take them to the new site and we will hot wash them to sterilise them. We'll shred them to make them easier to process. So they are nice, clean, small products. And then we'll then what we call extrude them. And extrusion is essentially compressing the materials and making small pellets. And you can see the image on the left-hand side here. There's glass jars full of what we call the flake and the pellet, the two-stage process. And those pellets will be sold to people like Procter & Gamble, people like Lever Brothers, people like Ineos. And these are the guys that are making more bottles for you to buy your shampoo in, for you to buy your milk in, and for you to buy maybe your water if you're on a journey and you can't refill your reusable bottle. And you'll notice on many bottles these days, it talks about having 50% or up to 50% recycled material. And this is where it comes from. It comes from yourself. So it's part of closing the loop. It's part of the UK circular economy. And I talk about our plants at the moment. We have one plant at the moment just outside Liverpool, Skelmersdale. And the second plant that is being completed as we speak now and will become operational for January next year is at Avonmouth. And the Avonmouth site will process and sort and create recovered material to the tune of about 80,000 tonnes a year. So they're quite scalable sites. I thought I'd touch on plastic bags and film because we had a question from one of the councillors about plastic bags and film over the past week leading up to today. And plastic bags and film are an absolute nightmare. Film does some really, really useful things. For or against it, it does preserve and can preserve the life of food and make food a lot. Well, preserving the life of food does, extends it. It stops food waste to a certain extent. And people wonder, what can you do with the film? Generally, we don't like it, but we get it in the recycling. Plastic bags, we don't like that in the recycling. So plastic bags and film we don't really like. However, we get a lot of it, and it's about 3.5% of what comes to us. So you imagine 3.5% of 300,000 tonnes is a fair amount. Why we don't like it is because it's flat, it's two-dimensional, and two-dimensional materials contaminates other two-dimensional materials. So, for example, paper and cardboard. So we have to take the plastics off the line by the use of near-infrared technology, and we blow it off. So we scan it and we blow it. So we create two separate streams. But plastic bags and film, there really is nowhere in the UK today where you can reprocess it. So what do you do with it? Do you burn it? Not a good idea, because it's a resource that can be recovered. In the recent past, there's been a lot of bad press about these materials being sent to, for example, Malaysia, being burnt at the roadside and allegedly being sent there for recycling. You'll be glad to know that's not what we do. We work very closely with a reprocessor in Turkey, a little bit closer, and we visit these people. We meet with these people and we walk around their factories, much like you've been around our sortation plant at Crayford, some of you. So here's some pictures here. So these are materials that have been shipped to Turkey. So this is plastic bags and film. And this is what's made out of it. So this is a bipolymer pellet that's been extruded through their process. And it's a combination of two plastics. But this goes back into industry to make new products. So all of the bad news about plastic bags and film, actually, it is recovered, it is reused, and it does form part of the circular economy. And it's just an image of the bags of that pellet ready to go into industry. Excuse me. And just to show you that we do check these places out and we do visit these companies as you would visit us, is an example of all the certification. So in Turkey, they do have an environment agency. They do have agencies that police their business. It's not just a question of taking it and putting it into a hole in the ground in Turkey rather than a hole in the ground in the UK. This is proper circular economy. This is proper capture and resorting of resources. My last slide really is just to illustrate to you that we have a website, and the website does contain a huge amount of information. You'll notice we are, the title page is all about bringing resources to life. Waste as a resource. I would never have thought it was as fascinating as it is when I first came into waste and the waste industry. But there's a huge amount of information on the website. There's a large number of publications that are available as PDF that you can pull down. And we also run through, for example, a typical Viridor plastics processing plant. So where the material comes in, it gets sorted, washed, cleaned, sterilised, and then flaked and extruded. So that you're welcome to go onto the viridor.co.uk website and peruse at your leisure. And that just gives you an overview of who we are, what we do, and how we fit into your systems. Okay.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, no problem.
I'd like to take the opportunity of thanking all 4 presenters for being with us today and providing informative and interesting presentations. Right, the Q&A session, I'm conscious that we're getting a little tight on time. I got answers to the pre-asked questions, and if the people who've pre-asked them wouldn't mind, I'll have these sent out to you. We've got your details. We do have answers to them from the various people that have been asked. I'm just going to quickly try and go through the questions that have been coming in. There's an awful lot of them, and I don't think we're going to actually have time to finish them. I think we'd be here till about 6 o'clock if we did. Right, a quick one from Councillor John Barnes about carbon reduction of hedges and also encouraging the domestically sourced timber in timber framed houses. I'm not sure who would be the best person to answer that one. Is there any of our speakers? Sorry?
Can I have a go?
Yes, by all means, Catherine.
Thank you, because I quite agree about hedges. However, there is a very complex relationship, isn't there, between hedges, agribusiness and the environment, but certainly domestically, yes, indeed. Timber framed houses, I think there's room for all sorts of building methods, and Councillor Barnes, I know, is on the board of the Alliance Homes, so is in a position to influence that. But I did want to ask a question about domestic timber, because the question I would ask, is it more environmentally friendly to source timber from the north of France and bring it in by boat, or bring it down from lorry, say from the large forests in the northeast of England? And I think domestic timber is sometimes quite lazy shorthand.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to have to cut them the conversations a bit on the short side to try and get through as many as possible. Question from Vicky Cook. I live in a cul-de-sac and we have a small verge. What could we plant to encourage this? I think that's one for Fergus and Keith.
Certainly. Yeah. Hi, Vicky. Small is beautiful. I would say just add as many things which have good local provenance as you can squeeze in. If it's very small, you can be very hands-on, create some bare soil, add good local provenance seed, and have a good look at the Plant Life website. I'd say that to everyone, and that will show you exactly how to proceed with the planting strategy.
Thank you very much indeed. Question from Councillor Andrew Brown. Battle Town Council's merging neighbourhood plan includes the need for swift bricks, and I think he means by that swift birds rather than fast-moving bricks, to be incorporated wherever possible in new housing and forms part of their design guide. Therefore, it is imperative that these design guidelines form part of the LPA deliberations when granting planning. Any thoughts on that one? No. Okay. I'll leave that for.
Sorry, David, it has to be included. I would have thought it's right at the beginning of the planning process. There are so many little changes that could be made for pennies. You know, houses are £200,000 or £300,000, and I would have thought for £5 or £10 you could add. Obviously, you're already onto Swift bricks, but bee nests and ordinary bricks for nesting things like blue tits and sparrows. I mean, sparrows are in decline. Everything is in decline, including our insects. So for tiny money, we could have a huge advantage.
All right, thank you very much for that. Right, on this one, there's a number of questions on grass cutting, verges, and I think both Fergus and Keith have touched quite a bit on that. I know from my own experience as a parish councillor, there's lots of discussions go on about cutting of verges, and we don't seem to progress one way or the other as to whether we want to carry on with the regime or not. I think if I can suggest that maybe that is something that could be taken forward with all interested parties, county and district, to come up with a common policy as to what we want to do. Moving on.
Less.
Yeah, just cut less.
Just cut less.
Save money. Save carbon.
Indeed. Right. Right. Given that much of the county is coastal, are we looking at the carbon sequestration properties of marine vegetation? I think Christina's probably answered that one. She said there's Help Out Kelp. It's a partnership project in Sussex, including the Marine Conservatory Society. John Barnes asked the question, we're drier than North Africa and throw a lot of wastewater into the sea at Peacehaven. Are we on target in 2020, I assume, to reduce the amount of water we're throwing away? That was to Jeanette. You're muted, Jeanette.
Sorry, I didn't quite follow that question. If you could just repeat that, please.
The question was, we are drier than North Africa and throw a lot of wastewater into the sea at Peacehaven. Why? And something about, are we on target in 2020? I assume to reduce the amount we throw away?
The amount of
wastewater.
Amount of wastewater, I have no idea. I'd have to take that question away and have it looked into. As I say, I deal with carbon reduction on our own buildings, so that's sort of out of my area of expertise. If someone could perhaps put that in writing to me as well, because I struggle a little bit. I'm partially deaf, so I didn't quite follow that.
Sorry, I didn't.
And I've got the closed caption subtitles on from Teams, and they really are putting a load of nonsense about driving to North Africa, which I don't really think was the question that was asked. But yeah, if you drop me an email, I'll find out who East Sussex can answer that question.
Yeah. In fact, I think at the end I'll ask if there is a contact point where people's questions can be passed and then responded to correctly. I say I'm quite quickly.
David, while you're looking at questions, can I just butt in and say about cutting regimes that I think you want a variety of cutting regimes. You want some areas where you cut regularly so that you preserve sight lines. You want some areas that you don't need to cut so often, maybe have flowering hiccups, but still low ground that people can use. You want to cut some areas late so that you develop, flowery hay meadow type vegetation, increasing the insect population fourfold, as Keith said. And you want some areas where you cut maybe once every 2 years or once every 3 years to develop scrub. So creating this mosaic habitat is very important for biodiversity.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for that. Right, there's a question here that which Simon could answer. It's saying that the Viridor presentation is not for external communications. First of all, is that true? And then if it is, how can we carry the broader public with us in valued information can't be shared?
Yep, you can share that between everyone within the councils, and if any of the councillors like to share that outside of council meetings and this forum, happy for that to be shared.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification on that. Right, one from Keith Robertson. Reference renewables procurements. Many Rother properties rely on oil to fuel home heating. The install of solar or air or ground heat pumps has a high capital outlay that will preclude it as a choice for many people. Switching to biofuel for kerosene, even in a 10% mix of bio to 90% kerosene, would reduce emissions at a minimum upfront cost. Is this something that the strategy could review as an option for a quick win? I think maybe Catherine, is that one for you?
Yes, that's fine. I say the strategy is a strategy. It's not a detailed action plan, and all the really good ideas that people have will be incorporated into how we deliver it. I would say, though, there's a village in Cheshire, and I think it's called Ashton Hayes, which decided to have a community ground-sourced heat pump, and they got a grant for it, and it serves a large part of the village and takes them all off the grid and saves them all quite a lot of money on heating. So it isn't just about individuals having such kit, it's about doing it as a community.
All right, thank you very much for that.
Just to add to that, I am aware that there's a scheme being looked at by Community South, the organisation I mentioned based in Lewis, that's putting together a strategy paper looking at if a similar scheme could be got off the ground in Barkham, which would be, again, a whole village ground source heat pump type arrangement. And they're looking at that in partnership with UK Power Networks, but it's only a feasibility and strategy document, which they've just started on, and it's being worked on over the next year or two. But if anyone's interested in that, that is something I can keep people informed on. Thank you.
Okay, a question for Simon. Do Rother use electric vehicles?
We do. We have electric vehicles on our fleet, which we can choose to move around in. A lot of our forklift trucks, FLTs, they are electric, so they charge overnight at some of our facilities. In terms of the shovels, there aren't electric shovels that we can use 24 hours a day at the moment. And I know that all of the bulkers that we move materials around in, whilst they're not electric, they are Euro 6, latest specification engines. So we do all that we can, but where electric vehicles are available for us to use, we do use them. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. It's now 4:33. The conference was due to finish at 4:30. Can I just quickly wind it up for everyone and say that before I close the meeting, there's obviously been a number of questions and we've not been able to really go into any great depth with. Is it possible to have a contact point either at a county or a district level to put maybe all these questions, because we've actually got the details of the people that have asked it, to actually take all these questions and respond to people?
Yeah, if you'd like to send the list of questions through to me, then I will do my best to find the right people within East Sussex to answer them. Yeah, no problem.
Right, thank you very much for that. Okay. Right. I think there's been many issues raised that perhaps benefit from follow-up a conference, and this may be something maybe we want to consider for later on. Anyway, I hope you've all found the conference informative and useful, and it's certainly provided plenty of food for thought on the damage we're doing, and that it's now more important, I suppose, than ever that we all play our part, no matter how small, to ensure that the climate changes that I think we're all beginning to see, to try and avoid becoming the disaster that's predicted. Because I don't think an option to do nothing is really an option while there's still time to do that. And if we don't, we're condemning future generations, I think, to a very bleak future. Right, that leaves me to thank you, all our speakers, Keith Datchler, Fergus Garrett, for their enlightening talk on how things can be changed by just small changes. Also thanks to Janet Ackroyd and Simon Pryor for their contributions and, again, food for thought. And I'd also like to thank Councillors Doug Oliver, Catherine Field and Christina as well for their contribution and involvement in organising this conference, and there are many people at Rother District Council and within the County Council. And if I may, I'd like to thank Claire Fletcher, who's been our technical support throughout this conference. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, thanks to yourselves for attending the conference, and which I will be one of many on this important and pressing issues. Thank you. Goodbye.